The microphone felt heavy in my hand. Not because it was made of metal or plastic, but because 23 years of being invisible suddenly had weight. I looked out at the crowd of 500 people, all dressed in fine clothes and expensive jewelry. And there, in the front row, sat my sister Victoria with her husband Richard. She was smiling. That perfect, practiced smile she had mastered since childhood. The smile that said, "I am the successful one. I am the one who matters." Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Now, let me take you back. To understand what happened that night at the charity gala, you have to understand how I grew up. My name is Sarah, and I am the youngest of 3 girls in the Harrison family. We lived in a large house on the outskirts of a small town in Ohio. My father was a dentist, and my mother stayed home to raise us. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. White picket fence, 2 cars in the driveway, a golden retriever named Max. But perfection, I learned early, is often just a carefully arranged photograph. My oldest sister, Victoria, was born with what my mother called star quality. She was pretty in a way that made people stop and stare. She had blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, blue eyes that sparkled under any light, and a laugh that sounded like tiny bells. By the time she was 10, she had already won 3 local beauty pageants. My mother kept her trophies on the mantelpiece, polished and gleaming for every visitor to see. My middle sister Danielle was the athletic one. She played soccer and basketball and ran track. She wasn't as pretty as Victoria, but she was strong and determined. My father loved to watch her games, shouting from the sidelines like she was playing in the Olympics. Her room was filled with medals and ribbons, and my mother made sure everyone knew about every single one. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the shy one, the one who liked to read books in her room while my sisters competed for attention. I had mousy brown hair that never did what I wanted it to. I wore glasses from the age of 7. My teeth were slightly crooked, but my parents said braces were expensive and Victoria needed them more because her smile mattered for her pageants. So I learned to smile with my mouth closed. In our family, there was a clear hierarchy. Victoria was the queen. Danielle was the princess. And I was just there. I sat at the dinner table while my parents talked about Victoria's latest achievement or Danielle's big game. They asked about my grades sometimes, but only to make sure I wasn't failing. When I brought home straight A's, my mother would nod and say, "That's nice, dear." Then she would turn back to Victoria and discuss her college applications. Victoria was going to be a doctor, everyone said so. She was smart, but not in a bookish way. She was smart in a way that meant she knew how to get what she wanted. She charmed teachers into giving her extensions. She convinced boys to do her homework. She made friends with the popular girls and used their connections to get into clubs and organizations that looked good on applications. I, on the other hand, actually loved learning. I loved biology and chemistry. I loved understanding how the human body worked. While Victoria was at parties, I was in my room reading medical journals I found at the library. While she was on dates, I was volunteering at the local hospital, filing papers, and fetching coffee for nurses, just so I could be near the world of medicine. When I was 16, I discovered something that would change everything. Our school offered a scholarship program for students interested in pre-med. It was a full ride to a prestigious university, but only one student from our county could win it each year. The application required essays, teacher recommendations, and a personal interview with the dean of the medical school. I didn't tell anyone I was applying. Not my parents, not my sisters, this was my secret. My dream. For the first time in my life, I had something that was just mine. I worked on that application for 3 months. I wrote and rewrote my essays until my fingers cramped. I asked my biology teacher, Mrs. Patterson, for a recommendation. She had always been kind to me, noticing my passion for science when no one else did. She wrote me a beautiful letter, she said, one that would make the dean cry. The day of the interview came. I borrowed a blazer from Danielle because I didn't own anything nice enough. It was too big in the shoulders, but I didn't care. I took the bus to the university, my heart pounding the entire way. The interview lasted an hour. Dean Morrison was a tall man with kind eyes and silver hair. He asked me about my volunteer work at the hospital. He asked me about the books I had read. He asked me why I wanted to be a doctor. And I told him the truth. I told him about watching my grandmother die of cancer when I was 10. About how the nurses had been so gentle with her, so kind. About how I wanted to be that person for someone else someday. The person who brings comfort when there is no cure. When I finished, Dean Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled and said, "Sarah, that was one of the most honest answers I have ever heard." A month later, a letter arrived at our house. I saw it on the kitchen counter when I came home from school. It was from the university. My hands shook as I picked it up. I didn't open it right away. I wanted to wait until I was alone in my room. Until I could savor the moment, whatever it was. But Victoria saw me holding it. "What's that?" she asked, walking into the kitchen. "Nothing," I said, trying to hide it behind my back. But she was faster. She snatched it from my hands and tore it open before I could stop her. I watched her eyes move across the page. And then something strange happened. Her expression changed. Her mouth opened slightly. Her eyes widened. "What does it say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, not her usual perfect smile, something else. Something I couldn't read. "It says you got a scholarship," she said. "To the pre-med program. Full ride." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had done it. I had actually done it. But before I could react, Victoria folded the letter and put it in her pocket. "I'll give this to Mom and Dad," she said. "They'll want to know. That's my letter," I said. "I want to tell them myself," but she was already walking away. "Don't worry," she called over her shoulder. "I'll make sure they know." I should have followed her. I should have demanded my letter back. But I was 16 and used to being invisible, used to letting Victoria take the lead. So I let her go. That night at dinner, my parents made an announcement. "We have wonderful news," my mother said, beaming. "Victoria has been awarded a full scholarship to the pre-med program at State University." I dropped my fork. It clattered against my plate, loud in the sudden silence. "What?" I said. My father smiled at Victoria with pride I had never seen directed at me. "Our daughter is going to be a doctor. Can you believe it?" Victoria looked down at her plate, modest and humble. "I just worked really hard, that's all." "No," I said, my voice rising. "No, that's my scholarship." I applied. I did the interview. That letter was addressed to me. Everyone stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Sarah," my mother said, her voice tight with warning. "Don't be jealous of your sister. This is her moment." "I'm not jealous. I'm telling the truth. Ask Dean Morrison. Ask Mrs. Patterson. They'll tell you." Victoria looked up at me then. Her eyes were wide and innocent. "Sarah, I know you wanted this too, but the letter came to the house. It had my name on it. Maybe you're confused because we both applied." "I didn't apply," I said. I did. "But you didn't. You never applied to anything in your life. Teachers did your work for you." My father slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough. You will not speak to your sister that way. If you can't be happy for her, you can leave the table." Tears burned in my eyes. I looked at Danielle, hoping for support. She shrugged and went back to eating. I left the table. I ran to my room and slammed the door. I waited for someone to come after me, for my mother to knock and ask if I was okay, for my father to demand an explanation. No one came. The next morning, I went to school early. I found Mrs. Patterson in her classroom, grading papers. I told her everything, about Victoria taking the letter, about my parents believing her, about the scholarship that should have been mine. Mrs. Patterson listened quietly. When I finished, she put down her red pen and looked at me with such sadness in her eyes. "Sarah," she said, "I wrote that recommendation for you. I specifically mentioned your volunteer work, your passion, your grandmother. If anyone asks, I will tell them the truth." But no one asked. Because no one at the university knew there was a problem, Victoria had my letter. She had shown up for orientation with it. She had enrolled in classes using my achievement. And because the scholarship was awarded to the student, not to a specific name, the university had no reason to question it. For the next 4 years, I watched Victoria live my dream. She went to parties while I worked at a diner to save money for community college. She complained about difficult classes while I took night courses at the local community college, paying for each credit with tips from waiting tables. She posted photos of herself in a white coat while I cleaned bedpans as a nursing assistant. My parents bragged about Dr. Victoria. They attended her white coat ceremony. They threw a party when she got into medical school. They hung her photo on the wall, right next to her pageant trophies. I stopped going to family dinners, stopped answering their calls. They didn't seem to notice, or if they did, they didn't care. I finished my associate's degree. Then I transferred to a state school and finished my bachelor's in nursing. I became a registered nurse. It wasn't being a doctor, but it was still medicine, still caring for people, still making a difference. I worked nights in the ICU. It was hard. It was exhausting, but it was honest. Every day I held the hands of scared patients. I comforted grieving families. I did the work that Victoria talked about but never actually did. Years passed. I got married to a quiet man named David who worked as a high school history teacher. We had a small apartment and a cat named Boots. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Victoria became a cardiologist. She married a wealthy businessman named Richard. They lived in a big house with a pool. My parents visited them every weekend. They posted photos of themselves at Victoria's dinner parties, surrounded by important people. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself I had moved on. That the scholarship didn't matter anymore. That I had built a good life anyway. But sometimes, late at night, I would lie awake and think about what could have been. About the doctor I could have become. About the years Victoria had stolen from me. Then, one day I got a call from my mother. "Sarah," she said, her voice strange, formal, like she was talking to a stranger. "Victoria is hosting a charity gala for the hospital foundation. She's being honored for her contributions to cardiology. We'd like you to come." I almost laughed. "You want me to come watch Victoria get another award for work I should have done?" My mother sighed. "Sarah, that was so long ago. Can't you just let it go, be happy for your sister?" "No," I said. "I can't," but David, who had been listening, shook his head. "Go," he said quietly. "Not for her, for you. Maybe you need to see her in person. See what she really is." So I went. The gala was at a fancy hotel downtown. I wore the nicest dress I owned, which wasn't very nice at all. It was dark blue and slightly wrinkled from being in the closet too long. David wore his only suit, the one he saved for parent-teacher conferences. We walked into the ballroom and I felt immediately out of place. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters carrying trays of champagne. And everywhere, people in expensive clothes, laughing too loudly, hugging too tightly. I saw my parents at a table near the front. My mother waved. I waved back. We didn't go over. Victoria was on stage, standing at a podium. She looked beautiful. Of course she did. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style. Her dress was red and fit her perfectly. Richard stood beside her, beaming with pride. "Dr. Victoria Harrison," the announcer said, "has been a pioneer in interventional cardiology. She has saved countless lives and inspired countless young women to pursue medicine." The crowd applauded. Victoria smiled that perfect smile. I stood at the back of the room, holding David's hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, rage, hot and sharp and undeniable. Victoria began to speak. She talked about her journey to becoming a doctor, about the challenges she had overcome, about the scholarship that had made it all possible. "I remember getting that letter," she said, her voice warm with nostalgia. "I was just 16. I opened it in my kitchen and I knew my life was about to change. My hands curled into fists. It wasn't easy," she continued. "Medical school is hard for everyone. But I had something special. I had passion. I had drive. I had the support of my wonderful family." She looked at my parents, who were practically glowing. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to leave, but David held my arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Look." A man was walking toward the stage. An older man with silver hair and kind eyes. It took me a moment to recognize him. Dean Morrison. He looked older now. His hair was completely white, and he walked with a cane, but it was him. The man who had interviewed me 23 years ago? Victoria saw him and her smile faltered for just a second, then it was back in place. "Dean Morrison," she said. "What a wonderful surprise. Everyone, this is the man who gave me my start. The dean who believed in a young girl with a dream." Dean Morrison reached the stage. He didn't return her smile. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned to the crowd. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. His voice was quiet, but the microphone picked it up. "But there's something I need to say." Victoria's face went pale. "Dean, perhaps we could talk privately after." "No," he said firmly. "I've waited 23 years to say this. I won't wait any longer." The room went silent. You could hear ice melting in glasses. Dean Morrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, yellowed with age. Folded and refolded so many times it was soft at the edges. "I kept this," he said. "All these years I kept it, because I couldn't let it go." He held up the paper. "This is a letter of recommendation. Written by a high school biology teacher named Mrs. Patterson. It was for a student. A quiet, brilliant student who had volunteered at her local hospital and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Victoria's face was the color of chalk. That student's name, Dean Morrison continued, was not Victoria Harrison. A murmur ran through the crowd. "I interviewed that student," he said. "I remember her like it was yesterday. She told me about her grandmother, about watching the nurses care for her, about wanting to be that person for someone else. It was the most honest answer I had ever heard." He looked out at the crowd. "I awarded that scholarship to Sarah Harrison. Not Victoria. Sarah. My name." He said my name. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. David's hand tightened on mine. Somehow, Dean Morrison said, that letter ended up in Victoria's hands. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. The scholarship had been transferred. The enrollment was complete. And Sarah had disappeared. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I've carried guilt for 23 years, Dean Morrison said. Guilt that I didn't fight harder. That I let bureaucracy and paperwork stop me from righting a wrong. But tonight, when I saw that Sarah's sister was being honored for a career built on lies, I couldn't stay silent." Every eye in the room turned to Victoria. She stood frozen at the podium, her perfect smile gone, replaced by something small and ugly. "Is this true?" Someone called out. Victoria looked at my parents, looked at Richard, looked for an ally, a friend, anyone who would save her. No one moved. "It was a long time ago," she whispered. "I was just a kid. I made a mistake. A mistake." Dean Morrison's voice was sharp. "You stole someone's life. You took years of education, years of opportunity, years of dreams. That's not a mistake, that's a crime." Richard stepped forward. His face was dark with anger. "Victoria, what is he talking about?" She reached for him, but he pulled away. "Richard, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you're not a doctor? That everything you've done is based on a lie?" "No, I am a doctor. I passed the classes. I did the training." But you never should have been there," Dean Morrison said. "Those classes, that training, it should have been Sarah's. Every patient you've treated, every life you've touched, you did it under false pretenses." The room was chaos now. People whispering, pointing, pulling out phones. Victoria stood alone on the stage, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect life. And then, somehow, her eyes found me. In the back of the room, in my wrinkled blue dress, holding my high school teacher husband's hand. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah, please. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them it wasn't that bad." I looked at her, my sister, the queen. The one who had everything while I had nothing. The one who took my dream and called it her own. I thought about all those years. All those nights working in the ICU while she slept in her nice house. All those patients I held while she attended galas. All that life I lived while she lived mine. I opened my mouth, and I said the only thing I could say. "I have nothing to tell them, Victoria. You wrote this story. Now you get to live in it." I turned and walked out of the ballroom. David followed. Behind me, I heard Victoria's voice, high and desperate. Then Richard's voice, cold and final. Then my mother's voice, pleading. I kept walking. In the parking lot, under the stars, David put his arms around me. I didn't cry. I was too tired for tears. Too old for them. But I leaned into his warmth and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in 23 years. Peace. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages, news articles, social media posts. Someone had recorded the whole thing. It went viral. Hashtag Dr. Lies trended for 3 days. Victoria was suspended from the hospital pending an investigation. Richard filed for divorce. My parents called me 17 times. I didn't answer. A week later, I got a letter. Real paper in a real envelope. From Dean Morrison. He apologized. Profusely, repeatedly, sincerely. And he made an offer. The university wanted to create a scholarship in my name for students from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to pursue medicine, and they wanted me to be on the selection committee. I said yes. I still work nights in the ICU, I still hold hands and comfort families. But now, once a month, I go to the university and read applications from young people who remind me of myself. Quiet, determined, dreaming of something more. And sometimes when I read their essays, I think about Victoria. About what her life must be like now. About whether she lies awake at night thinking about what she did. I don't wish her harm. I don't wish her well. I simply don't wish for her at all. Because I finally understand something that took me 40 years to learn. My life wasn't stolen. It was delayed. The path was harder, longer, full of obstacles she put in my way. But I still became a healer. I still touch lives every day. I still matter. And she? She became a cautionary tale. Sometimes when I'm leaving the hospital at dawn, tired but satisfied, I look up at the sky and think about that 16-year-old girl who wanted to be a doctor. The one who watched her sister take her letter and didn't fight back. I wish I could tell her it's okay. That she will be okay. That the world has a way of balancing itself out, even if it takes 23 years. But I can't tell her. So I tell the young nurses instead, the ones who doubt themselves. The ones who feel invisible. I tell them to keep going. Keep fighting, keep dreaming. Because you never know when someone might walk onto a stage and tell your story. You never know when the truth will finally have its moment. And when it does, all you have to do is be ready to walk away. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to reflect on the people in your life who might be waiting for you to see them. The invisible ones, the quiet ones. They have stories too. They have dreams too. And sometimes all they need is for someone to believe. Thank you for spending this time with Secret Chapter. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Share your own thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know. Until next time, be kind to the people around you. You never know what battles they're fighting. You never know what dreams they're holding on to. Good night.